Deadlier than Titanic, the forgotten tragedy of the Lusitania. Sometimes the past sinks to the bottom, taking its secrets with it. Sometimes when we call out to it, it answers, echoing from the depths. Today, the story of a ship that became a ghost of the 20th century. A story that can't be rewritten because almost no witnesses remain. This is the story of Lusitania. They say the sea doesn't remember those who drowned, but it remembers how they drowned. 1906. London is buzzing with anticipation. Britain still rules the seas, and shipbuilders compete for the glory of the fastest vessel. In the port of Glasgow, something extraordinary is being built. A liner that could outrun the wind. They named it RMS Lusitania, after an ancient Roman province, a symbol of strength and pride. Over 10,000 men worked on the ship. The clang of hammers, the sparks of steel, the smell of oil and wet iron filled the air. Engineer James Watson traced a line along the blueprint from bow to stern and said quietly, "If this ship ever sinks, it means God is against us." When the ship was finally launched, thousands stood on the docks, cheering, waving hats, crying. It wasn't just a vessel, it was the pride of an empire. No one knew that in just 9 years, those same waves would close over it like a grave. Spring, 1915. The war had been raging for 9 months. Europe was drowning in trenches, gas and blood. But across the ocean in New York, life went on. Broadway lights, morning newspapers, coffee with milk in street cafes. And among the hum of the peaceful city stood a giant silhouette, Lusitania, ready for her 200-second voyage. May 7th, 1915. On board, nearly 2,000 passengers, half British, 1/3 American. Among them, actresses, bankers, families with children, sailors, musicians, diplomats, and even a writer named Alvin Kennedy, dreaming of finishing his novel about the sea. They buy tickets, dine at the Ritz restaurant, laugh. But the day before departure, a strange announcement appears in the newspapers from the German embassy. Any vessel flying the British flag is liable to destruction. Passengers travel at their own risk. People read it and shrug. Nonsense. The Germans wouldn't dare. It's a passenger liner. No one cancels. In fact, even more people buy tickets, eager to sail on the ship everyone's talking about. May 5th, the 3rd day at sea. The water is calm, like glass. On deck, sunlight and the smell of coffee. Children play. The orchestra performs in the Versailles lounge. No one thinks of war. In one of the cabins, a woman sits at her desk. Marilyn Adams. She writes to her husband, "I feel as if the sea is rocking us to sleep. Sometimes when I stand at the rail, I think I can feel it breathing." Below deck, the ship's heart beats. 22 boilers roar with heat. The engineers work drenched in sweat. They know the Atlantic water temperature is just 12 degrees Celsius. If anything happens, they don't finish the thought. No one wants to think about if. Meanwhile, 1,000 kilometers to the east, near the coast of Ireland, a shadow glides silently beneath the surface. The German submarine U-20. Aboard, 35 men. Their commander, Captain Walter Schwieger, young, calm, the kind of man who's forgotten what fear feels like. His logbook entry for May 7th reads, "Weather clear, sea calm. Sighted a large steamer heading northeast. By size, likely Lusitania. Too big a target to let go." He orders, "Raise periscope. Take aim. Fire." The torpedo leaves the tube with a metallic cough. The submarine tilts slightly, then silence. 30 seconds later, the hit. On the Lusitania, the orchestra is playing. People are dining. Children are running on deck. When the first explosion shook the hull, many thought it was thunder or maybe a burst steam pipe. 15 seconds later, a second deafening blast. It tore through the lower decks. The lights went out instantly. The ship tilted. Marilyn Adams ran from her cabin. Smoke, screams, the smell of burning metal. She saw a woman clutching a baby and a hand slipping from the railing. Water already rose to her knees. "Life jackets! To the upper deck!" shouted an officer. "Stay away from below." Water's coming in fast, but no one heard. Panic, chaos. Boats crashed against the hull. splintering. Out of 48 lifeboats, only 16 were launched. The rest jammed or shattered. From the deck came voices. "Help! A child! Hold on! Oh God, it's going down!" Less than 20 minutes after the explosion, Lusitania was gone. I saw the deck become the ceiling. The water came from below like glass, and then everything disappeared. From the memoir of engineer George Kyle, one of the survivors. He found himself in the water, freezing cold, debris, luggage, bodies everywhere. People clung to anything that could float. Some prayed, some sang hymns, then only silence, the kind of silence you don't come back from. On the surface, around 760 people remained alive. Hours later, rescue ships from Ireland began to arrive. But out of 1,959 passengers, only 763 were found alive. The rest sank to the bottom. Together with the music, the letters, the promises, and the answers no one would ever receive again. In Berlin, the submarine's commander, Walter Schwieger, writes in his diary, "The ship sank too quickly. People in the water, I cannot fire upon them." Returning to base months later, his submarine would be destroyed. No one on board would survive. The music fades into a low, haunting tone. The voice becomes calmer. But that was only the first part of the tragedy. Because the sinking of the Lusitania triggered something that changed the entire course of the 20th century. The next morning, the shores of Ireland were covered with debris, suitcases, letters, children's toys, shoes. People from nearby villages walked along the beach, speechless. It seemed as if the sea itself had expelled its memories, unwilling to keep them any longer. On the sand, rescuers found the body of a woman clutching a child to her chest. Her face was calm, as if she were only asleep. Journalists wrote, "The quietest waves of the entire war and the loudest silence." In London, the Prime Minister was in panic. Headlines flooded the newspapers. "German submarine sinks liner, 1,200 dead, women and children among the victims." And across the ocean in Washington, President Woodrow Wilson received a telegram. The United States was still neutral, but among the dead were over 100 Americans. Newspapers printed the lists of names. In every home that lost someone, the paper became a funeral notice. In the streets of New York, angry crowds burned the German flag. German-owned shops were smashed. People shouted, "They killed our people." America began to awaken, slowly, from its illusion of neutrality. Meanwhile, Britain's Admiralty released an official statement. Lusitania was an unarmed passenger vessel. The Germans committed an act of barbarism, but some knew the truth. Captain William Turner, who survived, stood before the inquiry and said nothing. He wasn't allowed to. At the bottom of the sea, in the ship's cargo hold, lay crates marked cartridges, rifle ammunition, 5,000 cases, bullets, explosives, artillery parts. Lusitania was indeed carrying munitions, and they may have caused the second, far stronger explosion that split the ship in half. Sound of dripping water, a metallic echo. The camera descends underwater. 100 years later, divers exploring the wreck confirmed there are traces of internal detonation inside the cargo compartments. But the British government still forbids full investigation. The archives remain sealed. In the interest of national security, they lived, but never returned. Those who escaped the sea said they heard a call, as if the ocean itself tried to pull them back. One of them, Nora Jones, a stewardess who saved 3 children, recalled, "When I pulled the last boy out, he looked at me and asked, 'Miss, is this dream over?' I couldn't answer." She never worked on a ship again. Every spring on May 7th, she would walk to the shore, look at the horizon and whisper, "I can still hear them, knocking from below." Another survivor, telegraph operator David Preston, kept sending distress calls until the very end. "SOS torpedoed, come quickly." His fingers trembled. He continued transmitting as the water reached his waist. When rescuers found him, he was unconscious, still holding the telegraph key against his chest. After the war, he said, When the ship went down, I heard the waves tapping out the same rhythm, SOS, SOS, but not for us. After the disaster, the British government formed a special commission. The trial lasted 18 days. Captain Turner stood on the witness stand. They asked him, why was the ship unescorted? Why was the speed reduced? Why was the course not changed? He stayed silent. His lips only whispered, orders. Admiralty. He knew they needed a reason to show the world Germany's brutality, to push America into war. 2 years after the tragedy, the United States entered World War I, and the conflict became a global slaughter. Lusitania became its justification. The sea does not love the truth. It leaves behind only echoes. Among the bodies buried ashore were families, children, infants. They were laid in mass graves near Kinsale. People came silently, no speeches, no hymns, only wind. A boy who lost his mother once told a priest, she said she'd come back when the sea grew quiet. But the sea never stopped making noise. They say the ship sank in 18 minutes, but in the archives reports mention watches found on victims. Stopped at 14:32, 22 minutes after the explosion. No one knows what happened during those 4 minutes. Some witnesses claimed they saw a second periscope. Others insisted they heard 3 explosions, and one surviving sailor swore he saw a flash from inside the cargo hold before being thrown overboard. Maybe the submarine fired 2 torpedoes, or maybe the hidden ammunition ignited. But even after 100 years, the truth remains buried beneath the silt, at a depth of 91 meters in the cold Irish Sea. Years later, writer Clive Collins, the son of one of the passengers, wrote, "My father didn't die from the sea. He was killed by the lie. They all believed they were sailing home, but they were being carried to war today. All that remains of Lusitania are fragments of metal scattered across the ocean floor. Yet when divers descend to the wreck, their instruments sometimes catch faint pulses, as if someone is still tapping on the steel. Some say it's just the movement of the water, others that it's an echo of what refuses to be forgotten." This was Echoes of the Unknown. If you like this story, leave a like, subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next steps between and beyond. Write in the comments, do you believe the sea can remember? And remember, sometimes the loudest screams are the ones that sound beneath the water.